Yeah, the house was constructed somewhere around 1795, and when when my father bought the house, it had a front overhang room over on the second story. There was no entrance internally to get to the second floor. You had to go outside on the porch. My father tore all that off and added to the south side of the house a few feet and put the pillars up and converted it to the house you see there today. It's an 80 Willow Glen Road. The house had 6 foot, the basement had a 6 foot ceiling. My father lowered it by a foot. They had a blast inside the house to get the rock out. The walls were 3 foot thick, or 3 foot thick, solid. They're stone walls. And the house is dug into the hillside. So actually, it was a kind of a comfortable house in the summer. It was never got very hot downstairs because you had 55-degree temperature from the ground. And in the winter, it got cold, but you still had that heat coming off the ground. And my father did all the remodeling on it and put the pillars up and the doorways and built the chimney. The chimney has 52 courses of brick, as I recall. And my father thought he could do 4 courses of brick in a week and therefore complete the chimney in 13 weeks. He did 13 courses of brick a year, and it took him over 4 years to complete the chimney. I grew up in Milan. I was born in Brooklyn, 1931, and my father bought the property in 1936 from a man named Eugene Carraro. And I was puzzled by how would somebody from Brooklyn end up buying a house so far up north. Particularly somebody who didn't have a car, didn't have, wasn't sure if he could drive. My father told me that the property was owned by Carraro, although he didn't give a name. I got the name from E.I. Hatfield's records to town hall. But he told me that the Carraro was a bootlegger, and that he bought the property sometime in the 20s, and when Prohibition ended, he decided to get rid of it. So he offered it for sale, and my family paid $2,500 for it. He told me that at the time there was a barn on the property, just east of the house on the hillside, and what they would do is they'd come in on the Willow Glen Road. Of course, it wasn't called Willow Glen then, but they'd come in from the east side of Willow Glen and park the truck on the hillside and fill it up with the booze and coast past the next house, which was on a corner, still is, and then fire it up and take it to the city. When we bought the place, there was a lot of cement work done. There's still some visible, because that's what the fellows did during the day. It kind of looked like they were active. And the only thing they tore the barn down, I guess to remove the evidence, but they left part of the copper top of the cooking pot, which when World War II came along, went off to the war effort. So we bought the place in 36. I came up, I think, 37, 38 as a kid. And 39, I went to school when they opened up the school in Red Hook. Well, the war years were kind of interesting. I was, 10 years of age, I think, when the war started. And one thing was rationing. And my father had a one-cylinder old-fashioned metal garden tractor. And he got the same amount of gas stamps as somebody who had a full farm tractor. So my father always had a lot of gas stamps. The only gas station at that time was down in Rock City. It was owned by a man named Rance Schreiber, who was, I think, about 90 at the time. And Schreiber never was too interested in keeping track of the stamps. So when he ran out of gas, they wouldn't give him more gas until he got his stamps back. So they would get a hold of my father, and he would bring down his books of stamps and give them to Schreiber, and Schreiber would just paste them on the wall, and then he would get his gas commitment. I have one other recollection of the time. My father was not a citizen. He came over here when he was 6 months old. And in February of '42, the Sunday, early afternoon, two men showed up at the door, suit, dressed well, clearly not local, and asked for my father. And my father came to the door, and they were the FBI. And they searched the house. And it was interesting, they searched the parts of the house that were just his. The common rooms, like the living room, the dining room, the kitchen, they wouldn't touch. They didn't touch my bedroom because I was a citizen. Then they told him that they would be back the next day, on Monday, and they were going to intern him. And they took him to, I think it was Governor's Island. And he made arrangements with me to stay with, for a period of time, I think I stayed down with at the Wilger place, and some of the time I stayed with the Campbells. And he was gone about a month and a half, and then he came back. He said the only thing they asked him after all that time was he willing to be drafted, and he said yes, and they let him go on. One of the other things that I remember about the time was how much cleared land there was in Milan. Places that I now see fully grown with forest were open areas, and you made hay on it and was farming it. In the property that my father owned, the hillside where the barn is on that property, that was all clear, and that was a grape orchard. And it amazes to me how much of the land has grown back up into woods. I mean, the town has changed, you know, from the 600 and some there were in 1940, there's, what, 2,370 to last census. So the town has grown. I think one of the things that, I mean, IBM certainly impacted the town. We became a bedroom community. The thing I noticed most was the loss of agriculture. I remember all these farms we had, the Udeljack Farm, Wilger's Place, Coolidge's, a host of farms that were throughout the town that they were mixed agricultural farms. They had dairy, they had fruits, apples, sometimes peaches, and all that's gone. There are no dairy farms that I know of in Milan. And in some cases they've been replaced by horse farms, but that's, you know, certainly a different form of agriculture. So that's one of the things I noticed. The other thing is, I think Milan was very fortunate. I mean, I'm sure some will disagree with this, but I think Milan was very fortunate that back in the 60s, it brought on zoning. And it brought a kind of zoning on that provided for fairly reasonable pieces of land. 3-acre zoning and 5-acre zoning. And I think that helped keep this rural character of the community, even though it's not a rural community in the sense of all these farms. It spread the population out. And I think that to me was a major contribution made by that town board back in the 60s. Well, you know, I've been on town board for what, 20 years, and on and off, and I think the boards need to focus on trying to maintain the nature of the community without being oppressive about it. Be careful about what you try to do. You know, act in haste, repent at leisure is a good motto for town boards. We're in a fairly good position right now as a town. We have a pretty steady form of government's working pretty well. There doesn't seem to be anything on the horizon that's large that will unduly affect the town. I don't see any massive growth in the town coming up. I think there'll be a normal adding on a population, but I don't see any major changes or challenges coming up. Of course, that's subject to other people's powers too.